Hello everyone and welcome. You're watching Gravenhurst Public Library's Simple Sewing. So we are going to do 3 weeks of simple sewing projects that are going to teach you some of the basics, some of the things you need to know if you're going to start sewing. So you should have picked up your Simple Sewing craft kit from the library. This week for our first project, we are going to be making Voodoo doll pin cushions. What is a pin cushion? A pin cushion is something that you stick your pins and needles in so that you don't lose them and have easy access to them. So this is actually going to help you in the next couple of weeks to keep track of all the materials you get in your bag. So let's open this guy up and get started. Okay, so in your kit, you got a pattern, looks like that. You got stuffing, probably got some extra. You got 2 pieces of felt. In one of your pieces of felt, you will have gotten 4 pins and 2 needles, 1 big needle and 1 small needle. Okay. You got a piece of red felt, some embroidery thread, and a selection of buttons. Now this week you are also going to need some scissors. So go ahead, get everything set up, get all of your stuff out, and we'll get started making our voodoo doll. All right, our first job that we have to do is we have to cut out our pattern, our voodoo doll shape here, and we have to cut out the heart. So let's do that. Okay, so we have our little voodoo guy and our heart. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through and pull out all of my pins as well as my 2 needles. There we go. And I'm going to line this guy up so he fits nicely on the felt square. From here, I'm going to take a pin, so you can see my little pin, I hope, and I'm going to pin him in place so that I can cut around him. So to do that, I just stick my pin in, and then you can see it's sticking out the back there, I think, and I just come back up through the top so that my pin is holding this little guy in place. And then we cut. Alternatively, if you don't want to use the pin, you can also just use a marker and trace him onto the felt. Up to you. All right, so now I'm going to do that again on my second piece of felt, so I have 2 voodoo doll shapes. Okay, now that that's done, all that's left is to cut out our heart here. You can pin it, you can trace it. I'm just going to freehand it. Okay, now that we have both of our little guys cut out and our heart cut out, we are going to thread our needle. So you're going to take your embroidery floss. That's what this is. Embroidery floss looks like this. And it is made up of 6 different strands. Okay, so we're gonna take a piece that's about as long as from our wrist up to the crook of our elbow. Okay, maybe a little longer, and we're gonna cut that. And then we're going to take, I'm gonna use my big needle, and we're gonna thread it through. Like so. Okay, so there's some nice thick embroidery floss. I'm gonna pull it so that it is, there we go, so that's the same length on both sides. And then I'm just gonna tie a little knot in the end. To keep it from pulling through. So I'm gonna double knot it. So I have a nice big knot that you can see. All right, I'm gonna trim off some of that excess after the knot so that it's not getting in my way. There we go. Okay, so our first step here is gonna be to sew on some of the accents for our voodoo doll. So we have to give him a mouth, we have to give him 2 eyes, and we want to sew on our heart as well. Okay, so to do that, there we go. I'm gonna place my heart where I want it. So let's say about there. I'm gonna come up from behind my voodoo doll. Okay, so from behind the heart and pull until my string is tight. And then all I'm gonna do is go back down through the heart. Okay, so I'm back through, went through my heart. I'm gonna come back up behind the heart. Back up from behind the heart, pull tight, and go back down through again. Back up from behind. And back down through the heart. So you can see we're just stitching that heart on there, right? So back up and through. And voila, my little guy has a heart sewn on, okay? And so all I'm gonna do now is tie it off on the back. So to do that, I'm gonna I have my needle, right, my thread. I'm gonna just loop underneath of a previous stitch, like that, so that I have a loop. And then I'm literally just gonna tie it in a knot. So I'm just gonna loop through the loop and pull tight until it's in a knot. Then I'll cut it off. Something really quickly to note is that if you're struggling with your large needle, because it can be a little bit difficult to push through 2 layers of felt, you can always switch to your smaller needle and just break your embroidery floss down into smaller strands. So if you take the embroidery floss, right, and you make it the length you want it, so we do it from about the length of our forearm kind of deal, you can literally pull it apart into smaller strands. See? So I'm hoping you can see lots of little strands. So you could just use one strand, you could use two, depending on the size of your smaller needle, and use that guy to push through. That would work as well. All right, so I've rethread my needle, so I just put more embroidery floss on it, tied it in a knot, right? Same as before. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna give this guy a face. So we're gonna give him a mouth across here. So to do that, I'm gonna come up from the back again. Okay, and pull tight. And then we're gonna do a straight line across. So we're just gonna go back down about, you know, a thumbnail's length away. We're gonna go back down and pull it tight so that he has literally a straight black line across his mouth, where his mouth is gonna be. And then Voodoo dolls have their mouths stitched shut, so we're gonna make it look like his mouth is stitched shut by giving him a couple little stitches. So I come up on one side of the line, you can see, and then I'm gonna just go down on the other side. So there's one stitch, and we're gonna go for 3 here. So move down the line a little bit, come up on one side, up on one side, down on the other. Nice. Okay, up on one side, and down on the other. Okay, now he has a very stitchy looking mouth. And so we're just going to do what we did last time, and we're going to loop through a pre-existing stitch, go through the loop, and knot it so that it doesn't come undone. And we'll just give it a trim. So I've rethreaded my needle, and next we're gonna give this guy a little X eye, right? So an X for an eye. So think about where you want his eyeball, and then you're gonna come up from the back. You can see my needle there is coming up from behind. Pull tight until the knot catches, right? And then we're just gonna do a literal X. So we're gonna pull across like this and come down. There we go, and pull tight. Okay, and then we have to do the second part of the X. So I will come up. Don't be afraid to take some time on your placement because you want it to look good, right? So think about where it goes. Take your time. And then you're just gonna cross over and go back down so that he ends up with an X. So you see I just crossed over. So we're gonna cross over and push back through. And pull tight. And there you have it. He has a little X for an eye. And once again, we're gonna just tie that off on the back by looping through an existing stitch and making it into a nice knot. And then we'll just trim. Okay, I've rethreaded my needle once again, and now we're going to test out the options for the eyeball. So I think that one looks a little big, and this one perhaps looks a little too small. So I'm gonna go with my medium-sized button here for the eyeball number 2. And so when we're sewing on a button, the first thing you're gonna do is come up behind the button from the back. Pull your string tight. Okay, and I'm just gonna loop my button on and pull it down to the bottom. So you can see my button is just sitting on the thread, okay? And so what you do when you sew on a button, this button has 4 holes. Some buttons like this one only have 2, so you just go back and forth between the same 2 holes. But because this one has 4, we're gonna go diagonal and diagonal, 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 right? So I'm gonna go through, so I'm up through, and then I'm gonna go back down through the hole that's on the opposite side. Hoping you guys can kind of see that. Okay, pull it tight. Then I'm gonna come back up through the other hole that I haven't gone in yet. Okay, from the back and down through the other side. All right. So normally if you were sewing on a button onto a shirt or something, you wouldn't be using, excuse me, embroidery floss, right? You would be using regular thread, which is thinner. So you would go up through a few more times to really secure that button in place. But since we're using embroidery floss today, I don't really feel like that's necessary. So what we're gonna do is just stabilize the button. So I'm gonna come up through the back like we've been doing. So I'm just coming up behind the button, right? You can see that I'm just coming up from the back behind the button, okay? Then I'm going to wrap my embroidery floss around the button. I'm gonna do that about 4 or 5 times just to really hold it in place. Okay, and then we just go back down through the felt and to the back. Pull tight. And that will hold our little button on. And we're just gonna do what we've been doing, and we're gonna loop through an existing piece of stitching here and make a little knot. To tie things off. Pull nice and tight and trim. So here's where we're at so far. We have a little guy, right, who's got a stitched up mouth. He's got a little X eye, a button eye, and a heart. Our next task is going to be to sew these two together. And actually, I feel like it would be better this way, perhaps. Maybe not. It's going to be to sew these guys together and stuff them. Okay, so I've rethreaded my needle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to just use what's called a whip stitch to sew this guy together. So I'm going to come up over here, I guess. Where do I want to start? Here, yeah, I'm gonna come up over here. So I'm just coming up under his underarm here. I'm pulling my thread tight. And so with a whip stitch, instead of going back down like we were with the button from the front, you just keep coming back up from the back. Back up from the back. And then I loop back down and come back up from the back again. So we're gonna be making a pattern that looks like this, where it's coming up. Let's keep going. So all I'm doing is coming up from the back and pulling tight, making sure that these guys look decent and like they're evenly spaced. You can see this is a whip stitch. So again, I just loop back around the back, pop up, and pull it tight. If you're finding that your little guy is moving around a lot, you can take some pins and pin them together so that he stays in place. Remember, he's just a voodoo doll, so he doesn't have to look absolutely perfect. He's just gonna be our pin cushion. And this is our first sewing project, so don't feel like there's a lot of pressure. We're just kind of getting the handle or the hang of having a needle and thread in our hands, right? Just learning, which is fine. You can see it's starting to look like he's all sewn together, right? And so one of the things to think about when you're doing this is that you want the spacing of your stitches to be about the same. So you can see down here around this arm, I was doing a pretty good job with the spacing. Up here, they get a little too tight, but up around the head, the spacing is almost the same all the way between the stitches. And so that when you keep the spacing the same, it makes it just look neater and more professional, right? And we're just gonna go all the way around, continuing the whip stitch, literally until it's time to stuff. So we're gonna go all the way around until about the bottom of the leg here, and then we'll leave this slit open so that we can stuff the stuffing in, okay? So let's do that. Let's just sew. Okay, so I just took a second to put some more floss on my needle because I ran out a little bit, so I just tied that guy off in the back, and we'll just keep going. Okay, so I'm going to leave my little guy like that. So I have the rest of my thread here, and I've left open this side part so we can get in there and put some stuffing in. So I'm gonna start by taking my big thing of stuffing. I'm gonna grab a little piece, scrunch it up, and just start shoving it in. Might take a little bit of time, a little bit of patience. I'm just literally shoving all that in there up into his head. Right, we'll do his arm. So. Okay, that's pretty good. See, he's nice and squishy. Got some volume to him now, and I'm just gonna finish sewing him closed. So let's do that. Okay, and then what do we always do at the end? We tie it off. We loop through an existing thread and make a knot, right? Getting pretty good at it by now. Nice little knot that we can trim. All right, guys. We have made a little voodoo doll pin cushion. And so the idea is you can stick your pins into our little voodoo doll here. And you have a place that keeps them safe so you don't lose them for our next project next week, right? Voila, voodoo doll. Great work. Well guys, thanks so much for watching this week's Simple Sewing and for participating. Remember, if you have materials at home that you would rather use, needles at home, thread at home that you would rather use, you are welcome to. We just gave you the basics that you might need. If you have something better, go right ahead. But yeah, we made a voodoo doll pin cushion as our first project. And you know, I've never made a voodoo doll pin cushion before, so I'm quite proud of this one. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just learning today and kind of getting comfortable with the needle and thread. So great work no matter how he turns out. Thanks guys. I will be back next week with another take and make kit as well as another sewing video. So I guess I will see you then. Have an excellent week. Bye for now.